And let me know when you would like me to start sharing my screen with the slides.
Yeah, it'll be after I speak, I'll introduce you, and then at that point, my last paragraph is talking about the integrated design build project. So when I start with that, you can be kind of queued up as it were.
I'm going to assume we're now live. Is that a true statement?
That is correct.
Okay, great. So I'm going to call the Institutional Infrastructure Committee to order. And what is our first item on our agenda, please?
Yes, we have a future action item. This is Stacy Pearson speaking. We have a future action item, which is the WSU Vancouver Life Sciences Building Schematic Design Approval. And again, future action means we will present some information to you today and then answer any questions, but plan to bring this forward for an action item at the May meeting. So this is Happy News Project, and I will turn it over to Olivia Yang to talk about the history and funding history for this project, and then we'll proceed with additional presentations.
Terrific. Thank you, Stacy. Thanks, Olivia.
Thank you. Good morning. We have a full team here. I'm joined by Jason Bearlock, who's project manager, Mel and Lynn from Vancouver, and our design team, Scott and Darren. They will do full introductions as we get to them. I just want to say something about the project funding. As Kirk alluded to, we have, we're in the 6-year cycle, 3 biennia. We receive design money in the supplemental session last, and so when we did that, we started the design build, progressive design build selection process, and selected SRG and Anderson. Scott from SRG will be doing the presentation, and we have, as Kirk also alluded to, as President Schultz also alluded to, we have asked for construction money in the coming biennium. So with that, I will turn it over to Mel to speak about the program. That is to say, Chancellor Netzhammer will now speak to the program. I'm so sorry.
No, that's perfectly fine, Olivia. Good morning, everyone. It's nice to actually be at this point in the project. The disappointment when we didn't get funding for design in the first year of the biennium was high on the campus, and I just appreciate how Kirk and Stacy, Colleen and her team really came together to, and my team as well, to really advocate for design funding in the second year of the biennium, and we were one of just a couple of projects to get approved. So that brings us to where we are today. I can tell you that there's a huge amount of excitement on the campus for this project. It is our first building project in over a decade. One of my very first tasks, the first board meeting that we hosted on our campus when I became chancellor, included the dedication of the engineering building on our campus. And so it's nice to be at this point where we can see that happening again for the campus. The needs for this building go way back, all the way back to 2006, when the legislature approved the admission of first and second year students to all of the campuses, but for our purposes to WSU Vancouver. That meant we were taking in freshmen and sophomores with additional classroom space, but without any additional laboratory space for the campus, for teaching labs. And most of those students in their first and second year have a laboratory science course that they're required to take. So we have been short on lab space and have retrofit spaces and use creative scheduling. But in addition to just having this influx of students, we've also continued to grow, and we're 1,000 students larger than we were in 2006. And that has also come with additional faculty who have research requirements and those expectations of laboratory space to do their research. So we have been particularly under pressure in the laboratory space. One other piece of that is the vivarium, which is used in faculty research and is currently housed in a retrofitted building that also houses our College of Business. And so the idea of being able to design a vivarium was also something that was really important to this project. So this has been a need for a very long time for us, and we are excited to be able to move in that direction. And it will provide additional needed space for us. It is not like we're going to be freeing up tons of space on our campus with this project. This is additional needed space for us. And so with that, I will turn it over to Lynn, who will talk a little bit about how this fits into the context of our strategic plan, our master plan.
Thank you, Mel. I'm Lynn Valenter, Vice Chancellor of Finance and Operations at WSU Vancouver, and I've been there for over 20 years, so I've been a part of much of this development. Speaking to master plans, campus master plans are resource intensive, visionary, and they're intended to provide a holistic assessment and framework for campus development that guides growth for the entire entity, ensuring that each project contributes to optimization of character of space. WSU Vancouver adopted its first master plan in 1993. It formally approved updates in 2007 and most recently in 2019. Each plan has been an update to the original, further emphasizing character and growth while staying true to the original campus orientation and plans. And each has been formally approved by the Board of Regents and the regulatory authority for campus land use, which is Clark County. The original 1993 plan emphasized the permanent protection of the Mount St. Helens and Mount Hood View corridors, with the original quad centered at the intersection of the two corridors, surrounded by meadows. The 2006-07 update added 5 additional buildings, contemplated graduate student housing, and further examined and emphasized the development of a series of spaces along the corridors, with clusters of buildings creating a centering space. It also introduced parking garages in addition to existing surface parking. In 2019, the update original elements were examined and refined, and undergraduate housing, student life, and 3 other buildings were added. The adopted plan specifically noted the materials used throughout campus that were reflective of the character, while noting the need for design diversity and spaces welcoming to all. The materials included the green metal ridged roofs, the masonry brick, and Camas basalt. This building, which is the first to have been built with the updated master plan, actualizes the concepts developed within the master plan. The project team relied on the master plan in considering, developing, testing, and evaluating the location and form of the building. This project is a progressive design build project. We had an extraordinary response to the project RFQ with 9 highly qualified architect contractor partners responding. That was narrowed down to 3 finalists who each provided a, wait for it, 6-hour Zoom presentation to the WSU selection committee. A first ever for WSU in our remote environment. This resulted in the project award to SRG and Anderson Construction. Now I'd like to turn it over to Scott Mooney, project designer with SRG. Scott?
Thanks so much. And thank you everyone for joining us today. We're really excited to share the work that we've been doing with everyone at WSU on this project. We're very excited about it for a variety of reasons, and so we're excited to share. For this project, one of the sort of things that we'd like to talk about before we get into the actual building design is really about the sort of values around which we're trying to make decisions for the project. And so these are what we like to call our guiding principles through a robust survey process remotely, and just through a lot of conversations with all of the different stakeholders on the owner side with the university, but also on the student body side. We kind of came up with these sort of 6 values that we keep referring back to when we make those critical decisions about connecting and learning, making sure the building is adaptable and changeable over time. Really is fostering connections both within the campus community, but also to the community within Vancouver itself. We're understanding and prioritizing those unique view corridors. We're really reinforcing WSU Vancouver as an engine of opportunity and equity. And finally, we're trying to find a design solutions that really work for everyone. So this is the location of the building relative to campus as it exists today. As you saw in the master plan that we shared earlier, there's a lot of ideas around how it expands to the north over time. And so we're trying to be a stepping stone to that future growth as it grows to the northeast along the Mount St. Helens corridor. This next image is sort of a diagram that's abstracting some of the buildings, but also talking about some of the master planning concepts that we're trying to carry forward. One of the biggest being the square that was a part of the master plan that was envisioned to be occurring on the northeast end of the Mount St. Helens corridor, and really would be an outdoor room that's defined by the edges of these existing science buildings along that edge. But we're also thinking about views beyond to Mount St. Helens and how we connect down to future parking and future development. Another item to notice here is the route of accessible connections and pathways, and then where we are locating ADA parking, or where ADA parking is located now, and how we're responding to that. In terms of the spaces around the building, the site response, these are the big kind of 3 concepts that we're using to drive the building location and how we develop the spaces in between, which really is the kind of campus portion of it. And so as you can see, the square is a big concept that we're trying to reinforce that was a part of the master plan, but we're also looking at a secondary plaza on the lower level that makes the entry off of the ADA parking that's shared with the ECS building feel equitable and feel like it actually is, has some parity with the square, which is the entry off of Mount St. Helens. We're also looking at outdoor education opportunities. Is there a way to create some spaces in between the buildings that start to reinforce some of the curriculum around pollination and salmon safe ideas that are being carried within the building itself? And then finally, looking at the connections down the hillside, how can we really lean into the bucolic nature of campus and these rolling hills that really help enhance the beauty of place there? This is a sort of more detailed version of some of the ideas we're exploring. Something to note is the images you're seeing here are sort of a snapshot in the design evolution. They're the big ideas, they're the general direction that we're trying to go. These will change over time as we develop the schemes, but this is a kind of general direction that we're hoping to have your approval for today. So as you can see here, this is a more kind of defined version of the square, where we're really thinking of it as a gathering space that is contiguous with a generous lobby space that would provide a sort of indoor-outdoor fluid connection between this node on campus and what's happening interior to the space. We also have this plaza down here for the access off of the ADA parking, and then finally potentially some outdoor classroom. And this is how some of the moves that we're making in terms of the landscape design are being rooted and kind of anchored to some existing passive travel from the VSCI building and between the Clark College building. So we're really looking at existing arterials and ways that we can connect and reinforce some of those different pathways that already exist. In terms of the architectural language, there's a really clear campus character around a few different typologies of buildings, the gable being the most prominent. And that's where you see these larger scale forms that have that gabled roof. But there's also this interesting language around smaller scale spaces, and that we're calling that the pavilion. And something we've observed, and this is going back to some of the diagramming from the master plan, is a lot of the most successful active edges along campus, those places that really are the kind of heart of a lot of the student activity, tend to be off of the pavilion type structures. And so we were kind of using that as a way to help with some of our design decision making. And so this is the design, as you're going to see in terms of the massing response to the site into the context. So first, we wanted to reinforce the master plan by completing the square. And so that really led us to position the building in a way that created a well-scaled outdoor room between those existing structures. We also looked at the form of the building and how could it be a part of that sort of family of gabled structures that you have on that end of campus, so that when you view it from the west and you look uphill, you really see it as a collection of these similar forms. But we then also wanted to make sure that we were understanding and responding in a meaningful way to the topography. And so as the hillside kind of drops down, we really wanted to nest the building into that landscape in a way that really made it feel like a part of the place from in terms of the topography, but then shape that landscape so that we could really carve out areas for daylight and views for some of those program areas that were starting to get nested into the ground. And we then wanted to push the form out a bit so that we could help reinforce and create a new service road that would connect to the north in a way that allows us to set up a sort of public versus or sort of service versus public accessible routes to the future campus growth that would happen to the north. As you can see, there's a portion of the building that's sort of underground, and that's by design. And from there, we sort of redistributed the program in a way so that the underground spaces really were those more private and secure spaces, that being the vivarium and the mechanical rooms, but then took a lot of the more active public uses and pushed them back up to the top of the building. And so you end up with this sort of cascading footprint that allows us to kind of find value in terms of minimizing the amount of overall enclosure, but really putting those more active uses off of that sort of most prominent entry that is on the Mount St. Helens corridor. And then it brings the research down a level so that it's adjacent to the vivarium and those support spaces that are nested into the hillside. It then allows us to create this connections to those different levels and sets up these different public entries on the top floor, on that middle floor with the research level, and then a more secure entry that's off of this more discrete connection from the service road. From there, we sort of looked at ways we might influence the form to do a couple of things. First, reduce scale at the active edge, reinforce that kind of smaller scale expression that we know is so successful for the other social spaces on campus. But another critical, I think, value that brought to the project is it allowed us to then step the form to reinforce the view to Mount St. Helens, particularly from this really prominent conference room in the ECS building that we know is frequently used. And one of the, I think, major qualities of that space is that view out to Mount St. Helens. And so you can see in this study we did on the left, if we were to actually maintain the gable form, it would block that view of Mount St. Helens. But by making it more of a hip roof and a pavilion form and kind of merging those two different types of roof structures, we're able to maintain that view out to Mount St. Helens. In terms of the materiality, we are doing everything we can to respect the existing campus vernacular. The masonry you see on the left is what's used on the ECS building, and before that, the same mix and form that was used on the undergraduate building. This is the metal panel from the ECS building that we're taking cues on, and then also maintaining that consistent language of the standing seam roof, the canvas basalt for site moves, and some mix of site form concrete as well. And so this is just kind of glimpses of a moment in time in terms of our design. Again, like we said, it's evolving, but we really are trying to reinforce the materiality, the gable form, the proportion that you see elsewhere on campus. So this is the view from the east. This is a service road running along that east side. And then this would be those lower entries into those more secure spaces. This is looking south to the building. And so you can see how the form kind of evolves over the length of the building. And we really feel like the roof form sort of complements the slope as it falls down. We then have this gesture that moves up. And then on the west side, you can see how the form steps down to create that smaller scale space and maintain those views. This is looking into that west entry where we would have a sort of primary building entry, but then we would have what we would hope to be a more open and porous connection into this lobby area that would be smaller scale study spaces, or it could be used for open events. But the hope would be that it would really feel like a natural extension of the plaza, and you'd really have that strong indoor-outdoor connection between those spaces. And then finally, this is looking back at it from the southeast, and this would be that lower entry off of the ADA parking, and you can get a sense of how the pathway kind of continues to sort of roll down the hillside in a very sort of organic way. In terms of the internal organization, this is that upper level off of the Mount St. Helens corridor. These would be the teaching labs. Our nursing program would be consolidated along the northeast corner with the classroom and seminar spaces adjacent to the main lobby. As you can see, the lobby is off to the side of the primary circulation, which would then get you to a major feature stair that would bring you down to that lower level lobby that also has more public spaces, these being collaboration spaces off of that lower lobby. Here would be the research labs, and then the offices, research offices supporting those labs. And then finally, when you get down to the lowest level, you would have the vivarium and the mechanical essentially buried into the hill. And that is where we stand with the current design direction. Thank you so much for letting us share it with you, and I'm excited to hear everyone's feedback.
Great. Looks like John has been able to join us by phone. So sorry that he's not able to see all the great graphics here, but I know he will catch up on this stuff and probably have some input offline.
Sounds great.
And Heather, the photos are in the slide presentation is in the packet as well.
Right. Hopefully he can actually get on there. I know how it is when you lose internet and power and who knows what else. So I had just an observation and then a question. So that first of all, on the question, I know that we are very concerned about sustainability as a university and are driving toward that in a lot of our operations, and will be increasingly driving toward that. What does this building do in terms of advance the cause on energy efficiency and sustainability?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we are being very cognizant on the architectural side to really make sure we're hitting the sweet spot between the amount of glazing we have relative to orientation and views, but not to overglaze it in a way that makes it an energy inefficient envelope. And so what you're seeing here, each one of these openings is about 4'8" by about 10 feet, 11 feet tall. And so these are actually quite large openings. But in terms of relative to the overall building area, it's about 30% glazing, which is a sweet spot. We're looking at very, very efficient window systems. We're exploring better wall assemblies. But we also have some really efficient mechanical systems that we're likely going to carry. We're still in the process of hammering out exactly what those are. But when we did our initial assessment, determining where we were with our lead tracking, we look like we're solidly in the gold territory, which we're pretty excited about. And so there's some site moves around water efficiency as well. We're sort of taking the, I guess, holistic approach where we're kind of exploring all the options we've got and finding cost-efficient ways to potentially get those points. But we're looking comfortably gold for this project based on the kind of early studies that we've done.
Okay, and I guess it would be nice, maybe this is something for Stacy and Kirk to think about, is do we want to set a certain bar for every new building that we do or retrofit that we do and have that sort of be system-wide? Just a question that maybe we should take up at a future meeting. And then my observation is, I think this is really important, particularly post-COVID. One of the things I've been spending a lot of time on lately is economic development analysis for the state. And what's becoming increasingly clear is that knowledge workers who are place bound because they do actual physical things in the lab are going to be extremely valuable post-COVID. Knowledge workers who, like me and a lot of us on this call, who work with words and our voices and are able to manipulate databases from afar, are going to be increasingly mobile. And so from a state's economic development perspective, really doubling down on these lab-based STEM careers and growing new companies out of the research that we do and our great faculty and students has always been vitally important, but post-COVID, it's like 10 times more important than it was pre-COVID. So I hope that as we're talking to the legislature about proceeding with this project, we really emphasize the fact that these are the jobs that will sustain Washington State, and putting an emphasis on this kind of facility is pretty much the highest priority I can imagine for us and for the legislature.
Scott, this is Marty Dickinson. And so maybe this is a question for Darren, but from a timeline standpoint, what are the next steps, and from materials and access to materials for construction, how does that look? Because I know that there are some challenges in accessing some of this, and I know it just can cause some delays on things. So can you kind of walk me through timeline?
Yeah, so right now we have trade partners on board. So we are mechanical, electrical, fire protection trade partners are on board, and they're the big key components of long lead, mechanical systems, plumbings and piping. They're part of our functional work groups that we have in our big rooms. Our next steps is probably to get on our lab casework furnishing contractors, and then at that point, then we'll start looking at the structure. And the skins and so forth, and making sure that we're looking far enough advance in the material procurement, lead times, but then also helping Scott and his team of designers, make sure we're fitting the details correctly for constructability. That's kind of the biggest high level right now that our team's working through.
Mel, I'm sorry if I missed this one. So what is your desired date for opening?
Desired within a reasonable context. First we need to get construction funded by the legislature. That is really the top priority at the moment. The president is optimistic, I'm optimistic, but it's still something that has to happen before we can move forward. Once we have that, I think groundbreaking could potentially be late in the fall or early in 2022. And then from a campus perspective, Lynn, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we're envisioning about a 2-year building cycle.
Okay.
Real quick, I just wanted to give us a little bit. So our team is planning right now for December 2021 start. I mean, this is what our team is planning, and being available for the 2023 August 2023 for the opening. That is our Anderson SRG goal.
Okay, thank you.
Ooh, I was close.
This is John Shuttler. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, you have no idea how disappointed I am that I don't have internet, and I had such an issue getting onto this call late using my phone, because this is the stuff that I do and I love doing. So I really look forward to getting caught up on this. And all the things that I heard during the presentation sounded like you're focusing on many of the right items, issues that we should be looking for. So I look forward to really diving into this at a later date. I'm curious about the contracting process and how that works, and also project management to ensure that we don't have all the scope creep or unforeseen conditions that all add to costs along the way. Being that I'm new, if you could just ground me a little bit on that, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Perhaps this is Olivia Yang, Facility Services. Perhaps I could start and others can augment. So the basis of this is we are using the design build contracting vehicle under state law. Well, there was a change in state law some 5 years ago that allowed us to move towards a qualification-based selection And that's what we refer to roughly as the progressive design build. And so it is still a owner design build, i.e. contractor arrangement, but the as in design build, the design team is part of the contractor's team. And so we can bring the team on board very early in design, which at WSU we found to be very helpful because it encourages collaboration, exchange of ideas, and also the constructability and the cost and scope alignment gets worked out early without problems down the line. In terms of managing the cost and the scope, we typically have, I guess, what you'd call aspirational scope. So we have the background here is that we have been accustomed in previous years from this on state funded projects to get a cut in the construction. So we've had to accommodate that by being able to manage the scope, compressing, and if we manage the contingency properly, to then expand the scope to buy those aspirational scope things. So we do tend to have a pretty tight scope to begin with, manage the construction contingency and other contingencies in the non-construction cost categories so that we can then buy back things at the right time based on the priorities that the whole team has set. I don't know if that answers your question or.
No, that was very helpful. Thank you. And certainly pre-construction activities, when the sooner you can get a contractor on to actually deal and work with the team, the design team, they talk about constructability and look for ways to make modifications often to reduce cost. So, but I also understand that the state probably has very strict guidelines about how all of the procurement activities work. So thank you. That was super helpful to get me grounded. I do appreciate it.
I would like to offer one element of the contracting that may be of interest to the Regents, and that is that during this process, we kept equity at the forefront. And one of the methods that was proposed and we embraced was that in some cases, having smaller subcontracts let rather than just having one, then it goes to the largest firm. That's a strategic choice that allows smaller kind of technically named minority and women-owned businesses to compete. And many of our general contractor partners in the region have specific initiatives to try to grow and nurture small business owners within the community. And so that's something that wouldn't necessarily be apparent, but I think is extremely important as we proceed with these projects.
And if I may, again, to add to what Lynn said, we're particularly impressed with the inclusion and outreach efforts that Anderson and SRG are doing. For example, WSU recently started working with the Office of Minority Women Business Enterprises, and we're in the process of developing the institutional inclusion plan for capital projects. And one of those things is one of the techniques we're using is what Lynn's talking about. You know, you break up work. Well, I guess you have to start, you target your market and see where the minority women-owned firms are, what they can do, what trade work they would be eligible to bid on, and you kind of shape the scope to make it so that it's friendly to those firms. We are actually, outside of this project, going to be working on other things that would help small businesses, prompt pay, for example, information, early information on the projects. All those things are at play here. And on the topic of early information, I believe we've signed Anderson up for 3 presentations. Is that right, Darren? To the different minority groups, particularly in Oregon, because that would allow us perhaps to work with the Oregon firms to also get certified with the Office of Minority Women Businesses. Do you have anything you want to add to that, Darren, if I mischaracterized the efforts?
Yeah, so we have a very large school project in Portland that's publicly funded. So we are out in front of the industry groups, the Oregon Minority Association of Entrepreneurs, the PBDGs. I mean, there's 4 or 5 industry groups that we've already advertised this project that it's coming. Jason and I have been working with Caleb at the state office to try and get some time set aside in these events to not only introduce this project, that it's coming up in December, giving everybody enough time to put it on the radar screen, but also give Caleb some time to get in front of these groups to then get registered with the state.
And this was part of the criteria that all of the contractor architect firms that I described earlier, this was part of the criteria that they were actually evaluated against with the freedom that Olivia described in the RFQ process.
I raised my hand. I'll take it back down. 2 things that I would like to add. First, Olivia, you could also talk a bit about the Tri-Cities building and the fact that through really nice management of that project, we did not have to go into the contingency funds and we're able to go back into the building and do some things that we needed to. And I think that track record of success is important for our Regents to hear. And the second thing is, Mel, and you knew this one was coming, I'd like you to talk a bit about philanthropy and a little bit of your thoughts on some possibilities on building enhancements or things that you're thinking as chancellor we might be able to do in the building over the next couple of years with private dollars.
You go first, Olivia.
Oh, well, actually, I think the president pretty much described what happened at Tri-Cities. And as I mentioned earlier, we had to evolve into this technique, if you want, through the difficulties with coping with cuts at the time to the construction funding. And I think it's where you get everybody together and it's kind of a tough love conversation that says, okay, we have to protect ourselves against overrunning. And the way to do that is to start small, look at our contingency, be very disciplined about what we spend for. And as money is made available, as you move through the construction process and the contingency, then you kind of put money away in your little kitty. And then you say, okay, we got enough money. We can now buy this thing that is on our aspirational scope list. It's actually something that we have been doing almost all of our projects. We actually informally call it the accordion scope. So when money shrinks, the accordion shrinks. And as money becomes available, when we manage the contingency, the accordion gets a little bit bigger. So we've actually used that. We used that first, I think, on PACCAR, because we were cut in construction and we had to quickly figure out how to do that. And as time went on, we refined it more and more. And so now we think we're pretty good accordion players now.
Well, Olivia, I appreciate the humility, but the point I wanted to make to the Regents is that with several major capital projects, this one, the baseball clubhouse, the Tri-Cities, you and your team have done a great job of managing this and not coming back and going, oops, we went a couple $1 million over because we weren't, working with our partner architects and building firms. So all I want the Regents to know is you and your team have done a really fantastic job on this, on our last several capital projects that have come in on time and under budget. And I think that's important for them to hear. That was my point. So keep playing the accordion. You've gotten really good at it. Mel and Stacy and Lynn are going to want you to keep doing that great accordion work. So anyway.
All right. Thank you. Sorry about that.
No, that's definitely true. And so a total $60 million life sciences building is already, you start with constraints. Life science buildings, laboratories are very, very expensive to build. And so managing the budget, I just really appreciated what I've heard from our colleagues at SRG and Anderson as we have gone through the project. And that has led to some design changes, but not anything that I've seen as compromising, except perhaps for the elimination of the greenhouse. And so that, I think, is something that faculty are already raising questions. How are we going to raise money for the greenhouse? And I think that is one of the very targeted specific areas that we have to think about as we move forward with our fundraising plan. Beyond that, Jennifer Miltenberger has already started looking at potential donors. We had a meeting a few weeks ago to talk about naming for the building and for spaces. We have a meeting tomorrow with the foundation specifically to talk about shared responsibility as we look at fundraising. And that's really a pre-meeting before we come back with Kirk and Stacy to really lay out a comprehensive fundraising plan for the building, to make sure, to use Kirk's words, to make sure we get the building we need when we are complete.
And if I may, President Schultz, you had talked about, we talked about being the accordion player. Jason Bearlocker is joining us today. He's the project manager for this. He's also the project manager for baseball and plant sciences, Rec 5 in Pullman. So he's the real accordion player. I'm just his agent, he's the real accordion player.
Thank you, Jason.
No problem. Well, one thing I can point out is the space you see behind me is actually for the plant sciences building. And that was a space that actually was part of our accordion scope because we got cut pretty significantly on that project. We had to put this whole space that was, you see in the background behind me, on the buyback list, which we were able to buy back in the project during construction to allow it to be totally completed and usable for the researchers.
I just would say, Olivia and Jason, thank you for that, because, in the private sector, people are, they're doing the accordion effect on a regular basis, right? Because there only is so many dollars. And so to be in the public sector and to have that kind of transparency and intentional behavior around being good with those taxpayer dollars, we appreciate it a lot. And it's important, especially right now.
Thank you.
There's also, I would add there, Mel, thank you. There's a significant philanthropic opportunity that we need to pursue, and we need to start looking, and I know we already have on some projects, is the state dollars is sort of a down payment investment in a facility, and it's really up to us to figure out good creative ways to leverage those dollars with our donors. And I know that we announced a recent matching gift program, for example, for some athletics facilities. But if we look historically at WSU and say, how many major gifts have we gotten for facilities? My guess it's, kind of almost one hand or less. And so this also is important for us to work with our donors and investors and remind them that it's great the state is providing 3/4 of what we need, but it's not 100% of what we need. And so I'm confident working with Mel and his team that we're going to be able to do some enhancements that we need to that really make sure that we're getting the life sciences building that Vancouver needs, not just today, but well into the future. And this is a great opportunity to leverage that. So my previous job, I was in a state where the state just did not provide capital funds. So if we were going to build it, we had to go raise it all. And Washington, to me, I love the fact that the legislature invests, but we need to find ways to move beyond that. So Tri-Cities, I know we've got a couple nice gifts for their building there as that opens up this fall. And Mel's got a little longer runway, a larger donor base, and a business community in Portland and Vancouver that I think we can also get really engaged, that loves to hire the graduates from our Vancouver campus. So, we'll need everybody to lean in and help, but I'm excited and I'm ready to get on the road and start asking. So.
Hey, Kirk, do you think, and Mel, maybe you can speak to this a little bit. Do you think there's two parts here that from a philanthropy standpoint, and I think it's a discussion for a bigger, for our larger Board of Regents, but sometimes I wonder if a little bit of our WSU philanthropy kind of alumni giving is a little complacent because we live in a state where our state funds capital projects, right? And so I think we sometimes have alumni that are like, well, go Cougs, and I hope you like my $10,000 contribution. But, you know, the state will take care of the rest. And I just, from a philanthropic standpoint and from a cultural standpoint, I think we're at an interesting juncture of how we change the culture of giving for Coug alumni and how we approach that on from academics to athletics to buildings. It seems like we need to probably roll up our sleeves and figure out a new way to really teach our alumni or bring them along with us on how to give.
Let me start and then Mel can answer that. I think, Marty, you've hit a real key point, and to me, it's an area of opportunity. But in my mind, it sort of starts at, you have to look back. And when I first arrived, when we were doing buildings, and I had a visit with a donor, they would say, well, you should go work the state harder to get more money. You should go talk to X, whoever X was, because they have financial resources and they should do that. That's changed, and that's due to Lisa Calvert and Pat Shun, and our conversations are a lot more that there is no other person to go see. And that's why I think the gift to athletics, people can go, well, that's intercollegiate athletics. I'm not trying to get us off on that, but that is a major investment in a physical facility that's not go find somebody else. And I told several people that the best thing that happened to our engineering aspirations to build out our engineering complex is the gift to athletics, because now we've got somebody who wrote a $7 million check to say, I believe in building out things. And now when you sit down with somebody who wants to say, go build a $20 million structure or 50 and here's 10K, it's not that it's not helpful, but that no longer plays into the way we operate. So, we got several great examples, but this is a big challenge for us. And we just need, as we have those successes, to leverage those. And so, for example, that matching fund athletics, we raised $1 million the next 2 days that were matched off of the fact that somebody did it. So how can we use that same strategy now around an academic building in Vancouver? And I think there's some lessons to be learned there in a positive way that we can use.
Yes, absolutely. And Marty, I think you are absolutely accurate. And this has been an evolution for public higher education. Even in '87, when I started in Buffalo, we were not allowed to fundraise because that was the state's responsibility for public institutions. In New York State, private institutions have a huge amount of power. And so that's the group that did the fundraising. And so booster organizations that became foundations that raised money for you was how all of that began to evolve in higher education. And so I think that piece of the culture is hugely important. And I think how we manage this for WSU, and I'm really pleased with Kirk's support for this. I would say that anyway, but I am for his support of this project, because he's seeing it as a system responsibility, not just my responsibility or Lynn's responsibility to get this building built. And I think that is hugely important for his vision and our vision of WSU. So I think all of that, changing the culture, is really great. And I'm glad that our building is a part of that cultural change. The other thing that I would say is that there is a structural issue within the state of Washington that we have to address as well. and my colleagues can speak about this much more authoritatively than I can. But for money we raise for our buildings we build, we don't get M&O. And so the maintenance and operation of those buildings also falls on us. And so I think there has been a hesitation historically to raise money to build our own buildings because of that structural issue as well. Stacy, did I kind of get that correct?
Yeah.
So I'm noticing that we're 3 minutes from the end here of our time. Is there anything else that we need to do in this meeting? I don't think so. Okay, no one's saying yes. So I would just like to, Kirk.
No, Heather, I just want to make sure you brought up something early about a general policy around our buildings and things. I want to just make sure that doesn't get lost in us talking about the building. So I just want you to know that's on my list to work with Olivia, Stacy, and her team. That's not a 15-minute deal, but we should do some background work on that. I just always want to make sure a Regent doesn't mention something that looks like we blow it off. So
thank you. Yeah, I was actually, my closing comment was going to be, I'd like to maybe have our next meeting of this committee up-leveled a little bit. And several topics came up today. The philanthropy topic came up, the sustainability topic came up, the DEI topic came up, the accordion player topic came up. And I think there's, Jason and Olivia and team have some perhaps lessons that could be imparted to the rest of the university as well. So sort of some ways of thinking and some ways of working that maybe could be beneficial for other segments. So I'd love to just take it up a notch. And I think we're also the group that looks at all the real estate that we have. So I know that's been one of my sort of pet projects that I would like to delve into, is understanding that. And now that we have Mr. Shetler on the committee, we can get really smart about that stuff. So maybe we can develop an agenda offline for the next couple of meetings that has some of that up-leveled conversation as well. And I welcome other ideas for what needs to be covered in a sort of a 30,000 foot level discussion as opposed to a building specific discussion.
Thank you, Heather. I believe it was last May, we did our first ever real estate overview for this committee. Yeah. And
it was last March because it was my very last trip before COVID.
Okay. And so we do have that scheduled, that update for this very committee to happen at the May meeting.
Cool, great. All right, well, we're 11 o'clock, so thank you, everybody. Great
Thanks,
work,
everyone.
Mel. We're gonna get this done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.